It's nice having you back again for another talk. The last time you were here, you spoke about your life of criminality and your time in jail. This time, you're back to speak about your activities as an activist. But before we move forward with that conversation, I'd like to roll a few clips from our last conversation. Roll them, Eduardo.
So yeah, I would definitely say that all the labor that goes on there is slave labor. But in prison, I worked in the kitchen several times. Got you get extra food there. You also see how stuff is made, which is not the greatest, but it it's mostly mystery meat and maybe some potatoes. Yeah, many different things. The prison terms were the first two were just possession of methamphetamines, which was a felony at the time, and the third one was sales. And definitely had this sense of a set of rules for myself that would allow me to justify my actions in some way to myself. Like say not stealing from a mom and pop operation, or just from the general public, working class people. Like construction tools is a big no-no, and stay away from that.
Hey Rick, it's good to be back. Thanks for having me.
After a few years in prison, you came back, and how long did it take you to finally get your life in order?
Well, I would say that from my last term in prison, which was 2012, it took about a year for me to start the process of getting off of drugs and alcohol. And from there, that process of getting my life together, probably, I would say another couple of years before it was really in a before I was really in a place where I was off parole, I was off probation, I had a job, I had a place to live, steady income, that sort of thing.
Now, things are different for you. You've been doing work for the National Lawyers Guild. Can you tell me about this organization? Who are they and what they do?
The NLG is it's the National Lawyers Guild, and they are, like the name says, a national organization, but they have um, like satellite groups in major cities. LA, the NLG LA is the one that I've worked with, and they also serve Orange County. And what they do, well, they started, during the civil rights movement, and they were there to watch for civil rights violations by the police, and report on those, and then offer aid in legal matters to people that are being abused by the police. And they haven't that's still what they do. um, there's been a resurgence lately with that. So basically, there's a brief training, and not brief, it's online now in the time of COVID, but they train you on what to look for, what to do, which mostly is take notes and try to get names and dates, and uh, retain that information for a certain amount of time in case they need it. And then they'll actually send lawyers to court to try to get people out, and they partner with other organizations that help pay for bail and stuff. They don't partner with them, that they'll give that information to people who are incarcerated due to protests. and yeah, it's completely nonprofit.
How and when did you become involved with the Lawyers Guild?
How I got involved with them was just literally being at protests, starting, a ways back, noticing who are these guys with these yellow hats. They wear these like bright highlighter, or we wear these bright highlighter yellow hats, and you know, having it eventually explained to me what that was, and I was like, oh, that seems like something I could do. So I would say, that was a process. I mean, this goes back years. Um, I remember I probably first noticed them during the several anti-Trump marches that I attended back in the 2016 or so, and then um, the first time that was really explained to me was probably much more recently, probably 2018 or so, and I'll make a decision to go do something, and then it takes a while to do it. I mean, you have to. I figured out how to get a hold of them, what I had to do.
In a nutshell, without going into too much detail, can you tell me what you do with the Lawyers Guild?
In a nutshell, it's a lot of standing around. Actually, we're there from before the protest starts until it ends. If it's super long, they'll do shifts sometimes, and but it's usually at least 4 hours. I've been at protests at 6 hours, just 8 hours, and we take up positions around the protest. We're not part of the protest. We're not participating. We're not uh, you know speaking or anything like that. We're like I said, we're taking up positions around the protest. We're watching what the police are doing, or what the counter protesters are doing, and we communicate those things with each other. And if I'm on one side, I'll communicate to one of the others. I'm like, hey, I'm seeing this staging area over here, and it looks like they're suiting up in their riot gear, or hey, there's a bunch of uh, you know counter protesters wearing MAGA hats, Martin, coming towards your side of the thing, and then we'll take notes on stuff that happens. If the police get violent, or counter protesters get violent, we'll definitely take notes. We'll take video of that, and we'll retain that for later use in case there's a court case involved in this. And um, that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
Tell us about some of the protests you've observed.
Some of the protests I've been to, of course, Black Lives Matter. A lot of times people mistake those things for, like, all the protests going on now are Black Lives Matter, but they're not. There's definitely ones that are put on by Black Lives Matter that I've been to. I tend to stay in Orange County, so I will go to LA, but I tend to stay in Orange County, and so a lot of the protests are Latino activists who are protesting for the same things, and also especially for the issues we're having with the border patrol, and small children in cages, and anybody in those cages. It doesn't even just the fact that anybody's in the cage in that way. They're definitely protesting those things, and they're very inclusive of Black Lives Matter as well, and also other issues. One Latino organized protest I was at, it was a protest and then a march, and we marched over. There just happened to be a Palestinian group who was protesting the American involvement with Israel in those horrible open air prison apartheid in Palestine, and there was a much smaller protest, and they diverted the march to that protest as well, and they just integrated with it. And the Palestinians invited some of the leaders of the Latino community up to speak as well, and they they showed their solidarity, and we as legal observers, there were legal observers of both. We just integrated our efforts pretty seamlessly, and we stayed there until that protest was scheduled to be over, and then we marched on. In that particular instance, the police were very subdued. There were actually several motorcycle officers who were stopping traffic and along our route, and they didn't pay much more attention to us. I wish I could say that was true for all of them, but that's definitely not the case. And that protest remained peaceful, which is the case with all of them. Like you said, we're going to get into more detail later. I would like to mention too that it's not just those types of protests, against police brutality and government brutality and government involvement and things they shouldn't be in. There was one that I was in Huntington Beach that I was at, that they were protesting the closing of the school. And it was people from all walks of life, all economic backgrounds, all ethnic backgrounds, and they were protesting the corrupt Huntington Beach City Council's closing of that particular school that it happened to serve mostly ethnic communities, but it didn't seem to matter to the people that were there.
How do you go out there? Do you have a notepad or do you keep notes with your phone?
Yeah, I go out there, dress depend on the weather. I do have a notepad. I bring safety stuff. What's the word for it now? PPE, whatever. I wear a mask, and I bring water and hand sanitizer for sure. And other than that, just a hat. But I definitely keep notes on a notepad, and most people do that. Others, there are people that take notes on their phone. Some people do both. We also take videos, pictures.
I want to get a few viewpoints from you regarding the functioning and organization of protests. What do you feel is the role of the government, federal, state, local, regarding the assembly of a protest?
Well, currently the role of government is they have to sanction the protest. Basically, you need a permit. You need to tell them what's happening, what you plan on doing, and where if you're going to stay in one spot, you're going to march down the street, and then they choose how they're going to react. Usually, the licensing body is different than the police force. But what I don't feel that they have any role in our basic human right to free speech, to make things better for ourselves. And I feel like if you're asking for permission to speak your mind, that's not freedom.
What do you feel is the role of the police or law officials?
Well, as we see, well, I don't know if it's so obvious to everybody. I see a lot of stuff on social media that's varying. It's usually people talking about stuff they don't have any information on, as far as the police go and what their role is in protests, Black Lives Matter or any other. Their main role is to protect private property from protesters. That's what they're there for, generally. And then again, I don't have any inside information. All I can say is what I've seen is that they are there to suppress and control and it depends on what the situation is or what their orders are. They'll be standing there peacefully for a long time. They'll just be standing there, they're milling around. We get kind of close to them, and the rank and file, I'm not talking about sergeants and captains and lieutenants, the rank and file police officers are definitely, you can hear them saying this over, we should just arrest all these guys, or let's start beating their heads now. And of course the higher ups don't have those orders, but they're ready for it. That's what they want to do. There's nobody telling them to shut. There's nobody going, oh, hey, Bob, you probably shouldn't say that right now. People can hear you. Nobody says that. I've never once heard any police officer tell another police officer not to do that, not to say that. They definitely don't stop each other from carrying out those actions. The only thing holding them back is their orders, their higher ups. And then once that order comes down, they're ready and they do it. They carry it out. It doesn't matter if it breaks the law. It doesn't matter if it violates civil rights. None of that matters. None of that matters. It's only what their orders are, and they're really, the police are there to follow orders, and their orders come down one way or another, and it really depends on how that situation is going to turn out, depending on how violent or non-violent the police are. So very generally and briefly, we have this philosophy of the rule of law in this country. We have a lot of laws, and we also have a lot of organizations to enforce those laws and also interpret those laws, which is the legal officials, which I think that's what you're talking about. And so their mandate is to apply those laws equally across the board. We don't need any new laws for that. They're already there. The fact that that doesn't happen shows that the system is extremely corrupt and unaccountable.
What is the role of the body in such a protest? Let me elaborate what I mean about the body. The body becomes not just a message carrier, but at times it is the message itself.
The body, the person standing there, it it really is the only message that they hear there. The signs, the speeches, the everything else is not taken in, recognized by the powers that be, or whatever it is you're protesting against. The people who are willing to come out, put their time, put their energy into showing up and standing in solidarity with whatever the cause is. Black Lives Matter, anti-war, anti-capitalist ideas. That's a statistic, is what they pay attention to. How many, what portion of the population does this represent? In other words, how much longer can we get away with what we're doing? Are there enough people upset? Are there enough bodies showing up regularly to these things?
What type of protest do you feel is most effective? Violent, peaceful, or maybe somewhere in between?
History shows us that protests, as far as protests go, peaceful protests are the most effective. But with the the idea that we're shutting things down, we're changing, we're costing people money. In other words, right? Like what was it, Selma, Alabama, where they shut down the bus system, they shut down businesses, they shut down a lot. I mean, it was that area was at a standstill, and they continued to do it. It's a continuous process. If you're going to do peaceful protests rather than uh, uprising, for example, or a coup d'état, um, it has to be continuous. It has to continue to happen, and it has to actually cause issues for the powers that be. It's one of the reasons why Black Lives Matter has shut down freeways, for example. Um, the violence in protests is, I mean, I've seen it over and over again. The police, they're peaceful. The protest is peaceful.
Do you feel protests are an effective communication tool?
Yeah, I think they are effective communication tools. I think that when you get enough people in the street, they have to pay attention to what they're saying. And again, like I said before, really the only thing that they're paying attention to is how many people are showing up on a regular basis. Can we ignore this? If it's under a certain amount of people, a certain percentage, yes, they can.
Do you think protests work, or are they just an ego trip of the protesters?
Besides the fact that ego is a part of the human condition, and there certainly are people, individuals, that are there to feed their egos. I mean, what do you call them? Instagram influencers or whatever out there just taking photo opportunities. It's definitely, they're feeding their egos, but they're not part of the protest. They're not there. They're not part of the movement that's going on. And I would say that's what works. Not protests themselves, a movement of people organizing, not just protests, political action, educating people on what's really happening.
How can protesters be sure they can win?
It's a movement that wins. Civil rights movement. The suffragettes were a movement. The labor rights movement was a movement. Um, the abolition was a movement back a long time ago. Those are the things that win. Those are the things that force politicians, but like the civil rights movement was a movement. It was nationwide, and it was actually a lot smaller than this one. But it was more focused, and they forced the president to work his ass off to get it done. He was not a good guy. LBJ was terrible, but he was forced into doing what he did by a movement of people, not a race, but people.
Did the police instigate some of the violence, or did they deter it?
I think the bigger question is, do protesters go there with the intention of violence, of creating violence, or whatever, vandalism, that sort of thing? They don't. Um, the police, there's no reason to deter that violence, because if they weren't there, it wasn't going to happen. They're there to follow orders, and those orders are often to be violent.
Do you think the police go into these protests looking for confrontation?
Yeah, they most certainly do. I mean, I, there's so much evidence of that, just at your fingertips. Anybody can just Google or YouTube search instances of police violence. It's it's astounding how much comes up, how much is there, how much proof, and how they don't care. They'll shoot somebody in the back, in the street, in the middle of the day, with people filming it. Yeah, ask yourself that. Why are they so comfortable with that?
How do the protesters interact with the police?
It varies. It depends on where the protest is, who is running the protest. A lot of protest organizers will have people there within their own organization that are specifically there to engage with the police, and they ask that the regular rank and file people that are there do not engage with the police. And that I would suggest everybody that if you're planning on attending protests, or you're going to go to a protest that may be violent, or there's police dressed in riot gear, and then they also put quite a few police in plainclothes that are inside the protest, that are walking around. A couple of things to look for in that is they're always in pairs. Police always have the same damn haircut and crew cut. Two guys with crew cuts and military looking shoes, probably cops. So it doesn't help to engage with them either. They'll spread false information. So that's generally one of the things that those guys are there for. And they're also looking for any sort of activity that they can arrest people for. Whether they've created it or not, whether they've entrapped somebody in that or not. So generally it's respectful, especially when it's a group of people that are specifically there for engaging with the police, interfacing with them. That's always respectful, and it's always a good idea to remain respectful of the police. Never a good idea to start yelling obscenities, which also happen a lot of it. A lot of times tensions are high, especially when a violent protest just happened the day before in that same spot with the same police. People get angry and they voice that anger, and they should be able to do that.
How was the violence stopped?
I can't think of a time where I saw the violence stopped by someone or somebody. Usually, if people try to get in between violent parties, they're sucked into the violence. They become victims of violence themselves. Um, I've only ever seen the police stop when they run out of people to beat up or arrest or tear gas or mace or yeah, it doesn't stop. Nobody stops it. There's nobody to stop it. Like I said, I've witnessed felony, battery, assault right in front of me with the cops looking right at it and them doing nothing. Nothing.
Was anybody arrested in relation to the violence? And were opposition groups arrested as much as Black Lives Matter protesters?
I've never seen a counter protester arrested. Um, I've seen them arrest Black Lives Matter, other protesters. For what reason, I don't know. They don't say, and there was nobody obviously breaking the law. Um, sometimes they'll just they'll create a situation and then start pulling people out and arresting them. Yeah, like I said, I've never seen them arrest somebody who was a counter protester. Not one.
Did you ever feel that you were in harm's way, or did anybody try to agitate you?
Um, yeah, I've definitely been in harm's way. I can't say that anybody's agitated me. I'm pretty good at staying calm and not reacting to what people say. It'd be a different story. Luckily, I haven't been in this situation, but it'd be a different story if if I felt like physical harm was coming my way. I would definitely defend myself, but I'm not going to take any action like that on just based on talking. I've definitely felt I've been in between the police and their intended victims, where that's where I've felt the most danger come from. And there's also where you never know. Somebody's going to plant a bomb. Somebody's going to start shooting from a building. I'm wearing a bright green hat. It's real easy to see. They don't know what we're doing. They might just see something. Oh, look at that. That's a good target right there. But I don't worry about that. I'm not. One of the things that attracted me to this work is that I'm pretty good at observing my situation. They call situational awareness. That's something that I'm pretty good at, and I could say, look, those cops are moving differently than they were before. Those counter protesters are acting like they're up to something. Look, if they're grouping up, they're talking, they're conferring, they might be doing something. And it's always good to, in any situation, just not only be ready for something that might happen, but people that are going to try and cause harm are looking for people that are unaware that they're going to do that. And somebody's watching them, somebody's looking at them, and then talking to somebody else, like, hey, well, look at those people over there. What are they doing? They're less likely to actually do the thing that they were going to do.
Did you ever get emotionally involved in any of these protests, or was it just a job for you?
It's not just a job for me. It's a labor of love. I would not. I mean, of course, we don't get paid, right? So there's that. I'm there for a reason. I'm there because I wanted to um, do more than just be a body in a crowd. Um, the only time I get emotional is when I see um, how do I put this, intense moments of solidarity between, like for instance, that Latino organization that we marched over, and then we joined up with the Palestinian group. Yeah, I definitely got choked up. It's great to see. It's the beginnings of a movement that needs to happen
What
instead of
does the
just.
Lawyers Guild do with the information you gather for them?
We take notes and video and whatever else of situations, and if somebody's arrested, we try to get their name. We try to get where they're being taken to, and we hold on to that information until it's requested by the NLG. If they have a case that they're pursuing, they will request that information, and we'll give it to them, and then they use it in defense of those people that they're representing.
What was your biggest takeaway or lesson learned from attending these protests?
My biggest takeaway, I think the thing that has really been clarified for me falls along the lines of voting. Um, one of the things organizers ask for, Black Lives Matter, doesn't matter, all of them, over and over again, is to vote. Not for the president, it doesn't matter who the president is, to them. That doesn't matter. What matters is to become engaged and educated on what is going on in your local, state level. Local first, state next, federal, and not, there's a hierarchy there too. Your congressman, your senator, and the president. The least important, the furthest away. Change needs to happen at the local level. And unfortunately, everybody spends the whole election season talking about who's the next president's going to be. Just figure out who you're going to vote for president, and then forget about it. Then when they get into the ballot box, when they get in to vote, they have no idea what all the other stuff is. They don't know what measures are on the ballots. They don't know who they're voting for assembly, state assembly, or their local assembly, or city council, or whatever. It doesn't matter. Dog catcher. All those things are more important than who the president is. Don't get caught up in that BS. Be educated on all the other stuff that's on your ballot. These local institutions are extremely corrupt. They are just as bought and paid for by other interests other than people, and they have no competition. Incumbents win 90% of the time, and if you really want to help these movements, be educated on what you're voting for.
Now, Todd, I'm going to throw a curveball here and completely change the subject. Okay, so this is my, how can you say, signature question. I ask all my guests this one. So, Todd, if you could be the member or a member of any sitcom family, television sitcom family, well, which would it be?
It's a great question. Great question. I mean, I don't really like sitcoms all that much, so I'm gonna have to go with the Sanford Family for sure, from Sanford and Son. I mean, best theme song ever. They live in a junkyard. Red Fox is hilarious. It'd be my choice for sure. It's like Sanford and Son is the show. It's the family I'd be in. 100%.
Green. Ah.